accessing and raising capital in this market. Huge issue from all the questions that we have. To answer these questions and take a deeper dive, I'd like to invite our moderator, Greg Chin, partner with the Transaction Advisory Service at CohnReznick, and the rest of the panel. Just come on up to the stage right now. And I'll just introduce Greg is a partner with CohnReznick's Advisory Transactional Advisory Service practices. He brings to this role over 30 years of experience in finance, auditing, and managing the transactional advisory service practices of national and global professional service firms. Greg built on his extensive experience in conducting financial due diligence, engagement, including buy-side and sell-side transactions in the cannabis, technology, software, pharmaceutical, consumer product, retail, business service, and manufacturing industries. I think I hit on every industry, Greg. Greg is a member of CohnReznick's National Cannabis Industry Practice. He has performed due diligence on cannabis operations across the U.S. and Europe on behalf of investors, leading multi-state operators, private equity funds, and lenders. Greg has moderated and presented on cannabis investing and due diligence panels at local and national conferences. Greg, thank you for being here this morning. I really appreciate it. And panel, thank you for being here.
Great, thanks, Tom. It's really great to be here. I had the pleasure or pain of being in Las Vegas a couple weeks ago for MJBizCon, and I would say this event is much more my speed, much fewer distractions. So it's great to see you all in person. I want to start by introducing our panel today. So to my left here on the end here is Patrik Jonsson. He's the Northeast Regional President for Curaleaf. He oversees the operations of Curaleaf in Connecticut, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, and Vermont. Patrik has worked in the cannabis industry since 2013, and as the president of Curaleaf, Massachusetts, was responsible for becoming the first operator to have 5 licensed dispensaries in the state. Prior to joining Curaleaf, Patrik held senior positions with State Street Global Advisors, Fidelity, and Nate Davis Research, while also co-founding 2 successful fintech startups. He also spent 2 years working for Commonwealth Medicine, helping to develop the Prescription Advantage program for UMass Medical School. And Patrik holds an MBA from Boston College. So thank you, Patrik, for being here. And next, I'd like to welcome Sarah Westby. She's a member and co-chair of the Cannabis Industry Team at Shipman and Goodwin. Sarah represents clients in employment-related litigation and counsels clients on a wide variety of employment matters, including discrimination, medical leave, sexual harassment, termination, COVID-19 protocols, and workplace safety. For cannabis clients, Sarah advises on formation and management of cannabis businesses, interpretation of state and federal cannabis laws, social equity qualifications and partnerships, business-related disputes, employment matters, and contracts. Sarah's practice also includes representing clients pro bono in immigration, domestic violence, and child protection cases through partnerships with Lawyers for Children America, the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and the ACLU. Outside of Sarah's practice, she serves as the vice chairman of the board of directors for Simply Smiles, a not-for-profit organization that builds villages of foster homes for children in Native communities. So for this panel, we're going to jump around a little bit. We're going to talk about investing in capital raising. We're going to have kind of investor perspective, operator, entrepreneur perspective, as well as advisor perspective. We're also going to talk kind of nationally, regionally, and kind of bring it down to Connecticut. So I want to start with the Patrik here, and just give us kind of your view of the market nationally and regionally based on your experience working with Curaleaf, and then how this kind of affects Connecticut, and then follow on with Sarah just specifically about the Connecticut market.
Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. Honored to be invited. Thank you, Greg, for having me. So as Greg mentioned, I think as you all know, you're all here for a reason, right? There's a lot of stuff happening in the industry. It's happening nationally. It's about to happen in Connecticut. I've personally seen it happen in Massachusetts, which is where I kind of started. So I've kind of been part of the Massachusetts going from medical to adult use. And it's a wild ride, I'm not gonna lie, it's crazy. So I'm excited to see that in Connecticut, I'm excited to see that in New Jersey and New York as well. So I think what we're seeing obviously on the national level is, there's all these states now opting in, and we've kind of seen a domino effect, especially on the East Coast, with these states going adult use. And I think, Massachusetts led the charge. I think New Jersey's going to be next, followed by probably Connecticut and then New York. I was hoping for a mid-2022 Connecticut adult use. I heard end of 2022 from a prior panel. So, hopefully it's still next year. But I think, what happens here is you're going to see a lot of opportunities to enter this industry. As an existing operator, for us, it's trying to figure out how do we convert from being a medical operator with a very limited, especially in a state like Connecticut, very limited program, right? In a state like Massachusetts, it was kind of a free-for-all as far as what type of products we could sell and how it worked, right? It was very kind of promotional driven versus Connecticut, you kind of, up until very recently, you were kind of tied to a particular dispensary, right? And it was very select type of products. So what you'll see is, as these states become adult use and kind of going, through the legalization processes, you're going to have a lot of operators coming in, right? Both out of state, and hopefully there's going to be a lot of opportunities on kind of local side. And we're seeing that across the country. There will be a lot of opportunities, but it's not for the faint of heart. Just my history in Massachusetts, I didn't have the funding early on. I was maxed out for credit cards. I think my wife knew about one of them. I was very close to divorce. It was very stressful. We thought everything was going to happen much, much sooner. It took me probably 2 years longer than I thought to get up and running for various reasons. I always joke I'm going to write a book about this when I get out of the industry, because there's going to be a lot of things that wasn't in our control, and I don't think was fair. And it's not necessarily anybody's fault, but that's just the way this industry rolls. So like I said, there's you. Hopefully, what you will see as entrepreneurs trying to get into this industry, or as operators on ancillary businesses trying to get into this industry, I guess high level what I can say is look at what's happening in other states. Like honestly, it's the best thing you can do. Other states have gone through this. There's a lot of lessons learned. There's a lot of operators, small and big, in other states that would love to talk to you. I mean, to me, it's I don't have anything to hide if you want to learn about what went wrong or right in a state like Massachusetts for me, because that's kind of where I hone my skills. I'm more than happy to share those, but there's no blueprint for this, right? Every state is going to do it slightly different, and it's going to be the first time they're staying in this industry. So I think there's I guess that's where I'm going to leave it for now.
We're going to get into it, Patrick.
Yeah. No.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming, and thanks to the Hartford Business Journal for having everyone. I echo what Ginny Ray said. It's really nice to be here in person, and thanks to Greg and my co-panelists here. So in terms of the Connecticut market, my firm has been advising clients in the space, both on the hemp, medical, and recreational marijuana side in Connecticut and other states for a couple of years now. And we've seen companies go from the very initial stages of startup to very successful. And the question is, how do they do it, and how do you do it in the context of this Connecticut market where we have this lottery system here? And that adds a big question mark if you are an investor or if you're an entrepreneur looking to start up a business. I think the most important point from a legal perspective is to line up the right people from the start. The people who will have priority, and that is the social equity applicants, may not have the resources of friends and family and a large network of people who can put up millions of dollars up front. But there are options, and if you are someone who meets the definition of a social equity applicant, or you're an investor who's looking to partner with a social equity applicant, my advice is to line up the right people. Your legal team, your economic advisors, your business and finance people, your accountants, right from the beginning, and that's going to help make you attractive to investors, and it's going to help with the application process and help you stand out in the process as well. And I know we're going to get into a lot of those things. Patrick has some fantastic insight from his experience, and I hope that I can contribute some things as well.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So on that point, what are some of the things about this industry that make it unique and challenging from a fundraising perspective?
I mean, I guess everything, right? I mean, it's you know, just throwing out some kind of story, right? So I started off in Massachusetts, right? Credit cards aside, you know, when we first got started, it was not a lot of regulations. It was happening kind of in the shadows a little bit, even though it was programmed, but it was one of the first ones, right? So nobody really, if you didn't pay attention to cannabis, you probably didn't know that you know, this industry was happening. So when we first started, we got an account with Bank of America, right? It took us probably about 2 months, and then that account got shut down. We held our money for quite a while. We couldn't pay rent. Like, we had put all our savings into bank because we needed to start writing checks to you know do whatever we were doing. So you know, that was a problem. You know, 2 years after that, my personal bank account with Citizens Bank that I've been with for 15 years got shut down because I got paid by Curleaf, right? So, you know, my 401k with Fidelity, I worked for Fidelity. I helped build a 401k system for Fidelity. Now it's kind of on pause, let's say, you know. So these are all like things you got to be, you know, recognize. So it's not, it's just, there's risks associated with some of these things, right? You know, let alone the funding. I mean, I mentor a lot of people. You know, obviously I've got most of my mentor bases in Massachusetts. That's where I started. I got some tremendous stories, success stories for a lot of my mentees and what they're doing. They're amazing, amazing entrepreneurs. But, you know, you might have heard of Shipman Goodwin, right? He's the youngest African-American dispensary owner in the country. He slept in the store for a year trying to get this up and running, right? He ended up getting divorced because of this, right? He was all in. This is what he was doing. And now he's got dispensaries in Massachusetts and in Oregon, and I'm helping him in, you know, as best I can, setting up with legal review on his application in other states, and trying to do what I can to try to set him up with investors and things like that. And another one of my mentees, Reginald Stanfield from Just Credit Cultivation, him and his crew slept in a trailer for 3 years to try to build a cultivation site, right? No electricity through the winter. Crazy things, right? So these guys they're all in, right? So it's, and so I don't want to downplay, you know, if there's a high application fee, but I agree. I mean, that should almost be the easy part, right? So from that point on, there's a lot of money that you will need to stand up this business, right? And I think it's a question later on, but, you know, you could probably rank as far as like what startup costs you need. Obviously, cultivation being the most expensive. If you're looking to do a 10,000 building, 10,000 square foot building, it's probably $5 million, right? So, you know, some of the lower entry points from a fundraising perspective is probably a delivery service, which is part of the reason Massachusetts got into this, right? I mean, if you can secure some couple leases on cars, you know, that's probably the cheapest one. A retail store will probably looking at a couple $100,000, but trying to get access to this funding is really difficult, especially if you don't really have a track record. And it's getting a little bit easier now with different options, but I think we'll get into that later on.
Patrick, following up on that point, can you just talk about some of the challenges from a real estate perspective? And I think a lot of the folks in here are interested from a operator's perspective, whether grow or retail, and the challenges there.
Yeah, no, I know we talked about it before with the zoning, and honestly, the way Connecticut is going to do it, I was unaware of, to be honest, the fact that they were going to, it sounded like there's going to be, you know, you can only have 2 grows in this state based on density and so forth, and in this region. That's not necessarily how Massachusetts did, but some of the challenges obviously is trying to find real estate, right? So very early on, we had LOIs, a letter of intent, on a ton of different properties because we didn't know which town or where we were going to get a license or how it's going to work. But that's difficult, right? Because we didn't have any money to pay for these rental properties. So what you want to try to do, if the landlord's agreeable, is, you know, have like, you know, here's an LOI that we have a letter of intent to use this property if XYZ happens, right? And maybe you pay a de minimis amount, like I'll pay $1,000 a month, or maybe I'll pay you $50,000 a day I open, or $10,000, or whatever it is, right? But your goal is to try to buy time because you want to have the money. We didn't have money, right? So I'm trying to like have properties lined up just in case I get a license, and you don't know if it's going to be 3 months or 2 years. And you keep hearing stories, you know, where people are holding properties for years without any luck, and they're, you know, depleting their 401ks and savings accounts. there's a young entrepreneur, Chauncey Spencer, in Massachusetts. He was the first equity applicant. He still doesn't have a store. He's gone through probably 4 or 5 buildings that he thought he had a line of sight on. Something happened with it, with his status or with the property, or, you know, he's probably the unluckiest guy in cannabis, to be honest. And you know, I'm still working with him. We're still trying to get him up and running. What you want to recognize is when you're trying to find property, right, first of all, you know, you want to make sure you obviously find a town that will allow you to operate in that town that's going to be zoned and so forth. Secondarily, right, you've got to have a landlord that wants to work with a cannabis operator, right? So that probably disqualifies a lot of the properties. Thirdly, which we found out the hard way, and it's something you want to ask early on, is just because the landlord does it, if the landlord doesn't own the building, a lot of times their bank will not allow him to have you as a or him or her as a tenant, right? So we thought we had a property. Lo and behold, when we were going to start working on the lease, because we only had an LOI, the landlord's like, you know, my bank's not going to allow us to work together. So on one occasion, we ended up having to buy the building, but in most cases, we couldn't afford doing that, so we had to go find a separate location. So very early on, it cost us 3 months here, 4 months here. So as you go through this, make sure you kind of check all those checkboxes.
Yeah, so just to kind of put an overlay on this, you know, what makes cannabis so unique and so challenging is that, of course, we have the fact that it's legal in Connecticut, but still illegal on a federal level. And then we also have the overlay of FDA regulations. And my firm has served as outside general counsel to a CBD company, and when they were first starting up, they had to use all cash. No bank would take their account. They had to put everything on a debit card, and that was really tough. But you know, we see that the law is changing slowly but surely. You know, but I think what makes this so challenging and unlike any other type of business is that those traditional avenues of financing just aren't available to cannabis companies, you know, at least for the time being. However, my firm does work with one bank in Connecticut who is willing to take on cannabis clients, and you know, it's a case-by-case process, but there are slowly but surely some players in the finance industry who see the opportunity and are willing to take on the risk. So there are some options out there, and I think on the real estate side, what we've seen in Connecticut is because municipalities have the ability to put this issue to a referendum and either prohibit, allow, or impose a moratorium, we have some towns who've already done that, and several have come out and said, no, we're not going to allow cannabis in our borders. But there are others who have come out and said that we will allow it, and others who have imposed a 9 to 12-month moratorium. So, you know, my advice would be to just keep a close eye on what the towns are doing. Nobody wants to be the first to try to start a business in a town that has never allowed it before, but we do have medical dispensaries who are operating in towns in Connecticut, and I think we can assume those towns are going to be a little bit more friendly to those businesses. So just keep your finger on the pulse of what towns and cities are doing, and of course, you know, if you need assistance with zoning and going through that whole process, there's help out there for that too.
Yeah, I just want to add, you know, one kind of comment on that. So when we first got started in Massachusetts, right, I don't want to say we took the easy way out, but we went with the cities, the early cities, which allowed us to get stores up pretty quickly. In hindsight, those stores are pretty terrible. They're not in the best spots, but we didn't want to fight 4 years in Boston, right, to get to Boston. So our plan at the time was, look, we got to get up and running and start making some money. So I think it was interesting what the former panelists were saying as far as like, look, if you're not ready, there's something to be said to being wave 2, right? Let wave 1 kind of knock down some of those hurdles for you, and hopefully when phase 2, wave 2 comes, that some of those more attractive locations might become available. Just a thought, but like I said, when we first approached, we went for like, hey, the city really wants us because they're starved for business, but like I said, in hindsight, we're not in the best location right now, in Massachusetts.
I want to shift gears a little bit into kind of an investing perspective. And maybe Sarah, you can start us off here. Just talk about some of the options, because you represent a lot of different clients within the industry, about ways that people can partake in investing. You know, if it's not in plant touching operations, what are some of the other opportunities with real estate or ancillary businesses?
Sure. So if you are interested in the plant-touching businesses, typically you're going to be looking at equity options. There aren't a ton of options out there for financing. Like I said, we do know of one bank in Connecticut who's willing to do it. But for most businesses, your options are going to be either self-funding or trying to raise money through friends and family, potentially taking advantage of those social equity dollars that are set aside in the legislation, although that seems like it may be some time down the road because they have to get the tax revenue for that. But the other options are going to be, venture capital and private equity. And so then the question becomes, how do you make your business stand out and attract the attention of private equity? And I think, from what we've seen, people who have great branding and marketing, effective social media campaigns, and most importantly, who have all their ducks in a row, who've done their due diligence, who have solid corporate documents, who have a good organizational structure, their bylaws, their articles of incorporation, everything is done professionally and in a thoughtful way so that investors looking at those documents will have confidence in the business. In terms of non-plant touching investment opportunities, I think certainly real estate is a big one. Growing equipment and testing equipment is another one that's a huge industry. The equipment is very expensive, but it's obviously necessary. And so there's definitely some opportunities for investment there, and obviously less risk because it's not a plant-touching business. And then the insurance industry, we've seen a number of players who are looking to get into the cannabis, insuring the cannabis industry.
Great. Maybe Patrick, you can expand a little bit on from a formation of capital and how it's evolved since you had started in the business. I think we're seeing some more options. I don't think we're quite there yet, or we'd like to be, but kind of bring us up to date on what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I wish for all the entrepreneurs out here there was an answer I can give that say, hey, go to this person, and because they're all in on cannabis and they'll write checks, but there's not, right? As I mentioned, when we started in Massachusetts, it was very hard to get loans. It was definitely funded through credit cards and a lot of begging, friends and family and trying to kind of get what you need. When we first started, obviously you got to focus on what you want to build. We started very small. We had big plans, but we started building very small because that's all we could afford. We did one grow room, and then we did two more, and then then we did build our lab a year later because we couldn't afford it until then. So you've obviously got to figure out how you slowly kind of make your way into the space. You can't probably, unless you've got some funding, you can't go big all at once, right? So you got to strategize how you kind of enter into the market. But when Massachusetts first started, there was no bank. But now there are actually a couple banks: Century Bank, Bay Coast Bank, and I think they mentioned Credit Union. Credit Union tends to be a little bit more friendly. What I don't know is actually the banks in Massachusetts. I don't know if they're doing business outside of Massachusetts. I know Century Bank was just acquired by Eastern Bank, so I think those banks could be banks that you could probably talk to. They've been actually very good to work with. You have pretty steep fees because there's a lot of risk to them. That have a separate vault for all the dirty money, right? They can't mix the cannabis money with the clean money. So they've had to take a lot of precautions on that. But yeah, there's some fees involved. But honestly, it was the best for us at the time. And like I said, they've been very good to work with Century Bank, and I've heard good things about all the other operators. But I think state chartered banks is a huge initiative that hopefully the regulators and the state officials can work with. I actually met with the Lieutenant Governor in New York, and he had a lot of questions about how it worked in other states around, because I think he's trying to figure out how to get some of the state chartered banks supporting this industry, right? I think that would be a huge win because it's still federally legal, so you're not going to get the big banks. But there are more and more options coming your way, and even companies like Curleaf, like we were still borrowing money at huge double-digit interest. I think it's 13-15%, right? I mean, there's no money to be had that's cheap. But what you are seeing is, larger operators, there's now optionality to restructure some of those loans down to single digits. It's still high single digits. But back in the day, we're talking 2-3 years ago, you could, even Curleaf, we're I think arguably one of the biggest, you could get loans for less than 13-14%. So it's not cheap to get money, but there, like I said, there are options, and I would definitely look at other states and some of those banks, because I think some of them are friendly. I think one of the ones we looked at was in Rhode Island early on that we're working with Massachusetts. So I think there's, you obviously look at the local banks first. I think they'll probably be more amenable, but I think there's some optionality in kind of Northeast for some of those banks as well.
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen nationally is that there are banks that are servicing most states that are happy to take your deposits, the ones that are, but I think very few are providing loans actually. And Sarah, I think you may have some experience with what's happening here in Connecticut, some options.
Yes, so as far as we've heard, there is only one bank who would be willing to provide financing services, but that bank is willing to do both deposits and financing services. So limited options, but I think it is going to continue to expand. I would say banks may also be an option, but I think the legal structure in Connecticut is really set up to reward partnerships, and particularly those in which there is an individual or an entity who meets the definition of a social equity applicant partnering with an existing producer. And there are myriad benefits in the law if you have a social equity partner, and those include a 50% discount on fees, the priority lottery, and in some cases you can even bypass the lottery.
I want to switch over to a question to Patrik. I mean, Curaleaf is vertically integrated. You've been involved up and down the value chain. Can you comment about where you see value creation, so opportunities for investors in seeing value creation, and then follow that on with the capital, roughly, like that's required at the different spots, and how intensive or kind of like what you think the demands are?
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is a brand new industry. There's going to be so many ancillary services that most of you probably never thought about, right? Just random stuff, right? Whether it's, special kind of shoe cover to walk around a building for cannabis that doesn't pick up flower, or security, or cameras, or, there's so many different opportunities. Like I said, that there's 9 license types, but beyond that, think of some of these things you don't need licenses for, right? Cleaning services to go in and clean in dispensaries, or do you need special equipment to clean inside the grow? Would that be an option? So I think there's a lot of initiatives around that. Curaleaf, we just launched a program called 420 by 25. So we're trying to work with 420 ancillary minority-owned businesses by 2025 to support and bring them in and have them work with Curaleaf as a partner in one of our 23 states, or even in Europe, that we're in now right now. But so our goal is obviously to try to support businesses, and it doesn't have to be plant touching, it doesn't have to be manufacturing or selling, but anyone looking to kind of work in the cannabis industry, set up a business, we're more than willing to kind of talk to you and see if we can and get you into the 420 or 25 program. But to your second part, I think and I touched upon this earlier. This is not if you're one of these 9 license types, those are not cheap businesses to get into. And I said on the higher end, we're talking the cultivation site. So roughly, if you're looking at a 10,000 square foot building, and I know the no farm guys can probably talk more about the outdoor, because I've got a phenomenal outdoor grow in Massachusetts, but indoor 10,000 square foot building, that's not even canopy. You're probably looking at $45, maybe $46 million, depending on what type of equipment and how you want to bootstrap it. And I would say on the cheaper end, you probably got delivery services, right? If you can figure out a way, and I'm honestly talking a lot of social equity applicants in Massachusetts that are going to deliver on how we can partner with them. Is there an opportunity for us to help stand up a fleet of vehicles as a partnership? Because that's probably the biggest cost when it comes to delivery of licenses. But we are not allowed to, have a delivery license in a state like Massachusetts. So we're looking to partner with operators that are delivering products to the end consumer, right? And then you also have the delivery licenses transporting product from a grower to a manufacturer, from a manufacturer to a dispensary store. So there's opportunities there. I would say those are probably the lower barriers to entry when it comes to cost. I think a great opportunity, if you do it right and if you do it early, it could be a manufacturer. We've got some pretty phenomenal brands sprouting up in Massachusetts with standalone manufacturers, right? So they're coming up with a line of edibles. They don't up chocolates, line up topicals, right? Where when they have set up a lab or a kitchen, right? It doesn't even have a lab. You can buy in finished oil from operators such as Curleaf or some of the other ones who are standing up here, right? We bring in oil, and then all you have to do is mix it, right? You mix it with some chocolates, pour it into a couple molds, now you have an infused chocolate bar, right? So there's optionality, and if you come up with a cool brand, I think that creates a lot of equity for you, right? Like now you've got something that's tangible, like, hey, this becomes, a very popular brand in Connecticut. You've got some legs there, right? I think an example being the Levia, it's Excelsior in Massachusetts, right? They crushed early on. I still think they're doing very well in Massachusetts. They came up with their first THC-infused beverage. I think they just sold to Air Wellness for like $15 million. They've been operating for less than a year, right? So I think there's opportunities as a manufacturer, right? I'd say that's like from a cost perspective, it's probably somewhere in the middle, depending on what type of equipment you need for the product you're making. But to me, that's a great opportunity, especially if you've got a sense of kind of marketing and kind of an identity of what you think could kind of become a neat brand. So. But like I said, nothing's cheap and everything's with a lot of risk in this industry for sure.
So kind of thinking ahead now for entrepreneurs that are getting into the business, I mean, we think for a lot of them, not all of them necessarily, they're thinking like, what's the future hold and what are the exit opportunities? And so maybe, both of you can comment on, what you've seen in the industry, what you think is going to evolve to.
I think some of the examples that were given, my appeal and things like that, I think those are, as an entrepreneur in this industry, I think that's probably shouldn't be your number one goal. That's a much harder path. But what we're seeing quite a bit, and I think what's, it kind of ties into a question earlier is, right, so social applicant getting up and standing up their business, what's their optionality for selling to another entity? I think that's an interesting play. Some of my mentees in Massachusetts are getting approached by multi-state operators about buying their store, buying their brand, buying, things like that. And I'm not saying that that's something you would want to do. Some people are like, look, this is my business. I want to kind of run it, and I want to just keep running as an entrepreneur, and I want to pay forward by bringing other people into the business. But some people, that's their exit strategy, right? They're trying to build up a business that's going to create generational wealth for their family. So I can't tell you guys what the right play is, but I think that's probably what you're going to see a lot as an early entrepreneur. If you can stand up a business that's making some money, and has a clean kind of balance sheet, clean cap table, so the ownership structure is not super crazy. There's going to be opportunities. I think you're going to be approached by probably a lot of different entities, right, who are not necessarily in Connecticut. So just for the record, Massachusetts, Curleaf, we're capped out with licenses, so we're not looking at, we are not able to, bring in more stores and so forth. But there's going to be a lot of people who did make the lottery or who are not currently in Connecticut that's going to look at come in. So I'm sure you're going to be approached by a lot of those folks, and I'm hearing and seeing in other states already. So.
Just to follow on with that, there are some restrictions in Connecticut's law about the transfer of licenses, but I believe the period for which you cannot transfer a social equity license is 3 years. So that's more manageable. It's a manageable period of time. It's enough time to get your business up and running, to attract the investors, and to get yourself in a position where you've built a brand and you're ready to sell the company. Any transfer of any type of marijuana license in Connecticut will need DCP approval, and even a merger or a stock purchase comes with notice and waiting period requirements. So you'll have to notify the Attorney General and the Commissioner of the Department of Consumer Protection, and then there's a 30-day waiting period. But I think those are realistic timeframes in which to build and sell a business in Connecticut. So the law does provide for those options.
And so, something to consider too. I think I mentioned this one. So one of my mentees, she's being approached by somebody to come in and acquire her operation, and they are negotiating right now whether or not she should be staying on. Her goal is to stay on as heading up that business. She is, in part, she is the face of that business, right? So that's something you want to consider too. If somebody approaches you, like, look, I want to remain in operation as long as I hit these milestones. I want to be the CEO of whatever business in Connecticut for the next 2 years, right? So just because they're acquiring doesn't mean you have to get out of the business, right? And hopefully, in some cases, they want you to stay on. But if they don't, consider that too. It's like, look, I built this business. I don't want to see it fail just because you're buying it. And, I want to see it too, for the next 2 years. So keep that in mind. That's an option. Like, just because they're buying your business, that doesn't mean that you have to pay them.
So, Patrick, you were successful in starting up a business and ultimately selling it to a strategic. Any recommendations for the audience here on how to go about doing that, and maybe lessons learned or what you might have done differently, and advice to folks thinking about a transaction?
I mean, I don't know. I would almost tongue-in-cheek tell you don't get into this business. I mean, for me, it worked out, but honestly, there was times where it was just miserable, right? It was just very uncertain, because it's you work in an industry that's not legal, there's no blueprint for this. Everything will take twice as long as you think. So, right, if you only have funding to last another 8 months, but you think you can get your stores up in 6 months, trust me, it will take a year to get your store up, right? So, no matter what you do, it will almost add twice the time. It takes a long, long time. So I think as far as lessons learned, I mean, I don't know, hindsight's 20/20, and I would have probably done everything over, especially, honestly, in our grow, we've probably redesigned a lot of the things 3 or 4 times. We wasted so much money because we didn't know what we were doing early on, right? And how do you build it? So what I would tell you is, like, look at what other operators are doing that are successful, not just in your state. If you're looking to do a grow and you want to come visit CurleafConnecticut, Curleaf, Massachusetts, let me know, right? Like, I'd love to, if you want to see ask questions, I can line you up with our growers or compliance people. Like, I want everyone here to succeed as an operator. That's, to me, it's the more the merrier. We're stronger together. So, but like I said, lesson learned. I mean, I had a lesson learned in everything I've done for the last 7-8 years, and I've done nothing right the first time or the second time probably. It's trial and error, and that's what's both fun and also scary, because there is no right way to do it, and you were going to kind of bob and weave and zigzag the whole time, and just be, like I said, just be ready for it. And one of the quotes, my business partner, he's got a saying, and it's true. He says, I wake up every morning knowing I'm going to slap in the face. I don't know by who, and I don't know when, but I know I'm going to slap in the face. And it's true. Like, there is, and honestly, very early on, my wife was always like, where are you going to be this week? I'm like, I can tell you, but I promise you, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday will change by the time Wednesday, Thursday, Friday come. Because there's always a fire drill, there's always something, you always have a surprise inspection or something going right or wrong that you have to react to it. So it's just like I said, it's a fun industry, but it's not, it's very stressful, and it's long nights and a lot of uncertainty.
Sarah, maybe you can help us wrap up, and just any advice you could have to people thinking about getting in the business or that are in it, and how to make yourself more attractive to investors.
Sure. So from the legal standpoint, as I said before, I think it's really important to line up the right people, whether it's your legal team, your accountants, your financial advisors, what have you. Get your corporate organizational documents in order. In the law, we have an expression, you can either pay me now or pay me later. So we suggest that you spend a little bit of money on the front end to get your documents in order, have a business plan, and that's going to help you throughout the process to get your license, to attract investors, and then if you want to ultimately raise some money through fundraising rounds, if you ultimately want to sell the business, that's all going to help you throughout that process. The other big thing that we're advising people on now is your disclosures, and this will most likely come down the line, but when you're looking to start raising money, you need to make sure that you are disclosing all material risks and that you are complying with securities laws. And that can be tricky in this business because you have, again, the federal illegality and the FDA regulations as an overlay. So, get good legal counsel to have solid disclosures, make sure that all your documents are lined up and your ducks are in a row, and that'll help you succeed.
Great. Thank you. So we have some time for Q&A. So I think there's a mic floating around. Folks have questions. We have one right here in the front.
Is it anticipated that there will be a current capital requirement, money in the bank sort of requirement of applicants at the different operator kind of levels?
So based on what I've seen and read from watching the Social Equity Council meetings and reading the law and the articles on the law and the operating regulations, I don't think there's going to be a hard requirement. So I think what they envision for the process is the initial license application, they want to see that you have an entity formed, that you have a business plan, and that everyone passes the relevant background checks. And then if you're a social equity applicant, you meet all those requirements as well. And then the second phase of the process, the provisional license, is where the council and the DCP are going to be looking at the zoning permits, your real estate licensing, your workforce development plan. They're most likely going to be looking at your capital. But from what I can tell, they want these businesses to succeed, and having a certain amount of money in the bank is not going to preclude you from starting a business, but they are going to want to know what your plan is for raising money.
So I have a question right here.
Very informative. Thank you both for all the information. I'm just like sitting over here beaming with all the information that I'm getting. So just two quick questions, one for each of you. Are you interested in taking on a Connecticut mentee? And are there any low bono legal services for social equity applicants? I'm an attorney, but I can tell you this legal minefield is well beyond the criminal defense work that I do. But just thinking about social equity applicants being able to retain counsel, even that may be cost prohibitive. So I'm just wondering if there are opportunities for that.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you asked that question because that's something that we're grappling with in terms of people calling us wanting legal services and wanting to start a business, but not knowing what it's going to cost in terms of legal costs, and not knowing how much of their limited budget they should allocate to that. So what we're doing at Shipman is we are trying to create some form documents to streamline the process. And we had a program where we offer low fixed or estimated costs for business formation, and that would include the type of entity counseling, the organizational documents, all the filings with the state, and the ownership structure. So that we can all offer at a fairly low and reasonable rate. What's really a big question mark in terms of legal costs is the real estate aspect and the zoning permits. And so, it's helpful that some towns have come out and said, we're going to allow this. And we know that there are existing dispensaries already operating in some towns. So those will probably have lower barriers to entry. But, in terms of filling out the application and in terms of counseling through the process with the real estate permits and all the regulatory compliance requirements after that, because there's still so much in the law that's uncertain and there's so many regulations that are to be developed, it's very hard to estimate those costs. But it's something that we are thinking about, we're working on, and please feel free to contact me after the seminar for specifics.
And I guess just for your first question, I've never said no. I think unofficially I probably have 7 or 8 across Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and New York. And I want to make sure that I can be successful and kind of keep mentioning them. And they call me all types of hours. I think over the weekend I had one of them call me about date advice. I was like, that's kind of not probably what I'm the best at, but he was very nervous about someone coming over cooking for him. We do have a program called We're Doing Good. So we actually have an executive roundtable. We have 45 mentees through that program. But it's definitely tough. So I'd love to, obviously learn more about my business and get in contact with our really good team. They're phenomenal. They're very understaffed for what we're trying to do nationally. But honestly, I want to help as best I can. But if there's going to come a point where I just don't have enough bandwidth, I literally have 18,000 unread emails. I just can't keep up. But I always try to do my best, and I always try to prioritize my mentees. So yeah, let's talk.
That's it. All right here.
Hello, I guess I'll take the last question. My question Patrik. My name is Sonia. I work for Comcast Business. First thing is I'd like to thank you for doing business with us throughout. And the second part of this is I know that you mentioned you've made a lot of mistakes over the years starting the business. Talk to us about your experience on the technology side of things and the type of mistakes maybe you've made that you don't want other people to make.
I mean, speaking of Comcast, right, so I think just in that example, so I think what we didn't do, we didn't have redundancy in internet for our stores, right? If your store goes down, which happens, right, there's blackout periods, whether it's internet, whether it's generator, having a generator, I think it's required for security systems, but if you don't right-size your generator to run your store, I mean, the generator will pay for itself in a day of sales, right? So I think those are lessons learned, like we were trying to cheap out on a generator, right? Like, hey, we just need enough to run the security cameras and the backup server. You know what, we lost out on like $20,000 in sales that day because we didn't spend $5,000 more on a generator. Yes, we couldn't afford it back then, but like those are the things, the same thing with internet, right? I'm not sure what the internet coverage is here, but we're in some spots where we don't have super reliable internet, right? So we have to get two different providers, right? If one goes down, we want to make sure we have it redundant. Same thing, you might not be able to have that day one, but those are things you want to consider, because if you can't have your stores open, like that's a big zero that day. And so whatever, so I don't know how much you're anticipating and making per day, but think about it. If you were out of business for a day, that probably pays for an extra generator. Like I said, if it's not day one, think about going back and evaluating your needs when you have a little bit of money coming in, right? So those are, technology, I think those are some of the ones, you should consider. And I think it's at a high level, like technology as well, it's, there's definitely challenges in technology with social media. I'm sure you've all known a lot of these Facebook accounts, Twitter, Instagram getting shut down because we're in the cannabis space. So we're constantly bobbing and weaving which keyword is going to get, it's kind of like a cat and mouse game, what keyword is going to get tagged by this provider if we send out a text. Right, so there's a lot of like challenges in that space in general, right? Like a lot of the SMS partners are being shut down because they're working with the bad guys, right? Us in the cannabis space. So definitely do your research early on, and like I said, some of those kind of it would seem easy, but like in hindsight, when you're trying to like do I buy the $3,000 generator or $8,000 generator? I'll pick the $3,000, right? That works, but in hindsight, like we lost some fair amount of money by not right-sizing for the future.
Time for a question here?
I just want to clarify, did you just say $20,000 in a day?
Well, there are stores that are making $100,000 a day.
Thank you.
And not necessarily ours, I'm just saying in general. I mean, there are stores, I heard yesterday from somebody in the industry, the early operators in Massachusetts, we were not one of them, they were seeing 4,500 customers a day. At about, let's imagine $100 per, that's $450,000 a day. Early operators, right? So I think first mover advantage is definitely something, and obviously depending on your market, and that's why location is key too. They had, this particular industry had location had a very good store. But yeah, no, there's definitely money to be had, and especially with adult use, right? I think medical is a little bit different because you've got a much smaller finite universe, but with adult use and 21 plus, and people coming out of state, tourists and so forth, there's a lot of opportunity out there.
All right, I think that's a good note to close on, so I'm going to turn it on.
Thank you very much.